Welcome to The Big Story. I'm Gretchen Ho.
I'm Pauline Verzosa.
And I'm Sean Yao.
For tonight's big stories, Makabayan lawmakers are racing against time to impeach Vice President Sara Duterte. The bloc has started signing on House colleagues for a resolution that will fast-track the process.
The Philippines files another diplomatic protest against China over a recent incident in Scarborough Shoal. But what more could be done to keep Beijing at bay? We sit down with the geopolitical analyst Richard Haydarian later tonight.
Also later, we will be speaking to ERC, or Energy Regulatory Commission Chief Mona Lisa de Malanta. That's because a power rate hike will be greeting consumers at the start of 2025.
Still a very long way to go for the impeachment complaint against Vice President Sara, but the Makabayan bloc has an idea on how to speed things up at the House of Representatives.
It is now gathering signatures for a resolution that would send the impeachment straight to plenary and shortly after that to the Senate.
But one ally of the Dutertes is almost certain that the impeachment will make it to the upper chamber and that there are already 5 senators who will surely vote for Sara's acquittal. Tonight's big story from Marian Enriquez.
It could take several weeks before the House Justice Committee could finish proceedings and ratify the impeachment complaints against the Vice President. The Makabayan bloc knows all too well that it is a race against time. That's why progressive lawmakers have started gathering signatures to get a little over 100 of their colleagues to fast-track Duterte's ouster. By way of a resolution, the impeachment can skip the committee level and go straight to plenary. From there, the complaint can be submitted to the Senate, which will act as impeachment court. Makabayan does not have the numbers yet, but it is confident that signing up certain congressmen will be a breeze.
Yung mga nag-participate actively doon sa mga hearings ay madali na sa kanilang mag-desisyon. At saka marami naman kaming mga kasamahan din na naririnig namin ng support sa impeachment.
So far, there are 2 impeachment complaints against Sara Duterte. A third one is expected next week. For complainants in the second ouster initiative, it should be clear by now why Duterte should be stripped off the vice presidency.
And I think it's well within our rights as citizens to seek accountability when public funds are involved.
Very simple na to para sa mga Kongs. That is their hearing. Sila ang naglunsad ng hearing. Sila ang nag-gather ng evidence. Ano pa bang aaralin nila? At galing sa kanilang impeachment complaint, when we drafted the complaint, we based it on their transcripts. We based it on the documents that were submitted to the committee hearing. So there's no reason for them to really dilly-dally here.
But the big question remains, is there enough time to make a go of the Duterte impeachment? The answer is yes for Batangas Representative Jinky Luistro. At least for the lower chamber, this can be finished before the midterm elections in May. She can't speak though for the Senate.
Is it legally possible na yung i-endorse na impeachment complaint ng Congress before the 2025 election may still be heard by the Senate after the 2025 election? That is a legal question that I want to raise.
While she's been quiet since the impeachment complaints were filed against her, Vice President Sara Duterte has claimed that this has been the plan all along of the administration. But if it were to go by his recent statement, even President Marcos is against impeachment, calling it a waste of time. For former Presidential Legal Counsel Sal Panelo, House lawmakers will still go ahead with Duterte's ouster, with or without an order or appeal from the chief executive.
Tuloy na tuloy yan, unless na magkaroon ng kidlat ng kaliwanagan ng bawat isa. Pero I doubt it. It's there. Political agenda nga yan.
At this point, Panelo is more concerned about the numbers when the impeachment finally makes it to the upper chamber.
Yung trial ang pag-uusapan natin.
Yes.
At saka yung botohan.
Yes.
Nandun na tayo. Ang problema mo sa botohan, depende na yan kung yung mga senador. You need about 9 votes for an acquittal.
Yes, more than 8.
Sa ngayon, ang tingin ko, parang lima pa lang ang siguradong boboto ng acquittal dyan.
According to Panelo, these senators will stand by Duterte, Bongo, Bato de la Rosa, Cynthia Villar, Mark Villar, and Robin Padilla. For News 5, I'm Marian Enriquez. We are One News.
So many questions still and so many variables. But if the impeachment complaint against Vice President Sara Duterte does make it to the Senate, how will the trial pan out? Mian Los Baños with that story.
Well planned yan, well planned. Kaya we are preparing for the worst.
This is Senator Bato de la Rosa's reaction to the question on whether or not he thinks there's really a plot to overthrow Vice President Sara Duterte. That's why he also believes even if VP Sara faces the probe and explains in Congress about her office's confidential fund spending, moves to impeach her will continue.
Sabi nga lang, kakapalabas lang yung text ng presidente nung araw na ito, kinabukasan, nandun na sila, nag-file na sila kaagad, lukuhin nila yung pagong.
This early, De La Rosa is expecting the impeachment complaint to reach the Senate, even if President Bongbong Marcos says it's not that important at the moment.
Totoo talaga yun, hindi lang yung for show or for para panghugas kamay no na text. Kung hindi yung panghugas kamay, sana may epekto. Maramdaman natin yung epekto. Kahit na sabihin man natin na panghihimasok sa trabaho ng legislative, pero kung meron siyang unofficial control over these people, maramdaman natin through the actions ng mga taga-House of Representatives.
16 votes are needed to impeach an official. And because there are 23 senators at the moment, VP Sara's allies will just need 8 not guilty or abstain votes for VP Sara to keep her post. Meanwhile, according to Senate President Chis Escudero, the upper chamber has yet to prepare for an impeachment trial.
Hindi, dahil ayokong i-assume yung mga mangyayari at ayokong pangunahan, one way or the other. Dahil pag sinabi ko maghanda na, magsimula na kayo, ready, get set, pero wala pang go, baka isipin ako'y pumapabor o kumikiling sa paghahain o pagsampa.
But former Senate President Mig Zubiri believes many of his fellow senators do not want impeachment for any official at the moment.
It's going to be very divisive. I know I'm supposed to not talk about the impeachment, but in my heart, is this what we want so close to the election? Sana walang gulo, kasi ayaw po natin ng gulo at this point in time. Gusto ko po nga namin ceasefire muna at this point in time.
Reporting for News 5, Mian Los Baños, we are One News.
Meanwhile, the Foreign Affairs Department has filed yet another diplomatic protest against China, this time over an encounter off Bajo de Masinloc on December 4. In that maritime incident, the Chinese Coast Guard fired water cannons and sideswiped a BFAR vessel on a resupply mission. Philippine Coast Guard ships were also subjected to blocking, dangerous maneuvers, and shadowing by the CCG. At last count, as of December 5, Manila has filed 60 diplomatic protests against Beijing. Now, this brings the total protests lodged under the Marcos administration to 193. Meantime, the National Task Force in the West Philippine Sea is considering the deployment of Philippine Navy warships to escort supply runs in disputed waters. That's since Beijing is already using its military might in WPS. But the National Maritime Council is cold to this idea, saying this could only lead to escalation of tensions in the West Philippine Sea.
And who do we call when maritime and political issues arise? Of course, the host of The View from Manila, geopolitical analyst Richard K. Darian. Welcome back to The Big Story, Richard.
Wait lang. I was expecting a different story. Hindi ko na lang sasabihin.
Darating rin tayo doon.
Sige lang,
Don't worry.
mag-comment dyan. Sige lang.
Political analyst on the big story for tonight, on the real big story for today.
Yes.
But we got to set that aside, and talk about what's happening over at the West Philippine Sea. First, with the incident at Bajo de Masinloc, they say this is the first time a PLA Navy ship has come that close and shadowed our vessels near there. Do you see this as an escalation from China?
Yeah, I mean, we see now when it comes to China, the so-called gray zone strategy, which is imposing their will short of firing shots at us. Wide spectrum yan eh. So it looks like China is keep on stretching it and squeezing out whatever it can squeeze out of that gray zone strategy. And it's really reminding us of its preponderance of force. So I think this is where things are really challenging for the Philippines, because we have been exercising tremendous amount of moderation and self-restraint, and at the same time primarily relying on public diplomacy and transparency initiative. but it looks like we're meeting the limit of that strategy. And I think this is where we have to move to the next level. As I said, we're still in the early rounds of boxing, if this were a 12-round boxing. But I think there's also indication that some of the strategies and tactics we're using are hitting a ceiling. Now, actually, currently I'm in India for a major event. And earlier this morning, there were conversations by the Indian counterparts here about their own experience with China. As you know, the other year, actually, Indian and Chinese troops engaged in hand-to-hand combat in the Himalayas. And eventually, when the Indians stood their ground, China backed off and negotiated a new interim agreement to de-escalate situation on terms that are more favorable to India. So what is the relevance of that? I think recently we heard from the Philippine Navy top officials that maybe the Philippines is also looking at employing its own gray zone strategies.
Okay,
not
let me just
only
interrupt,
countering China's
Richard.
gray zone strategies.
Right, let me just interrupt because that's exactly what I wanted to ask you since you already started it, right? So the National Task Force for the West Philippine Sea kind of favors that idea to send Philippine Navy warships to escort these missions or just to send them out into the area to do patrols. On the other hand, the National Maritime Council says they want to avoid a potential Navy-to-Navy confrontation. What's your take on this?
So a couple of things, no. On one hand, I think we have to be honest and recognize sometimes kung nakikita natin umaabot na tayo dun sa ceiling ng effectiveness of a certain strategy, right? So I think first we have to settle the debate. The second thing we have to keep in mind also here is our risk appetite. How much risk appetite do we have in a sense that what are we willing, what level of escalation are we willing to tolerate if ever China responds by something even more aggressive? Let's say we deploy naval vessels, they deploy a bigger one. Let's say we engage in hand-to-hand combat, they send 10 more guys to engage in hand-to-hand combat. And then the other issue is timing. One of the things that worries me looking at conflicts around the world is whether this is in the Middle East and more particular in Ukraine, everyone in anticipation of a second Trump administration is trying to create new realities on ground so that by the time that Trump comes in, those terms will be the basis upon which they will try to play their art of the deal with Donald Trump. So I won't be surprised if there's some people in China, I'm not necessarily saying this is the case, we don't have any intelligence what exactly happened here in terms of China's intentions, but I won't be surprised there are also some elements in China who are saying, habang wala pa si Donald Trump, and habang lame duck si Biden and US is in this kind of interregnum, right, of transition, maybe we can be a little bit playful, maybe we can push the envelope a little bit, and maybe we can set the terms of engagement with China, with US, in ways that will benefit us, even if the Trump administration will adopt a tougher stance against them in the South China Sea. So this is also the warring window. We see that also with Russia employing some of its own hypersonic missiles and even threatening to use tactical nuclear weapons. And there are also concerns in Syria and Lebanon, among other places, that some other countries are also, or players are trying to set the terms of the game and engagement before Donald Trump takes over. So this is the other angle we have to look at. So siguro may mga tao sa ating gobyerno, inisip nila, wait lang, may transition nangyari sa US, God forbid if something happens, hindi natin malaman, hindi natin alam kung makasaan natin ang outgoing administration. Maybe hintayin pa natin ang Trump administration. Let's get a sense of how far they're willing to help us, and then maybe we can move forward.
Richard.
So for me, if you take a more cautionary mode, I'd rather wait for the Trump administration before I make any major move there, because I want to understand, will my allies stand by me if we escalate this to the next level?
Richard, pwede ang magdagdag ng dalawa pang angle. Ito yung mga nakikita ko, no? Mga kuro-kuro din ng iba't ibang mga analysts, journalists, pundits. The one other angle, okay, is yung task force Ayungin nga. Now, recently, we discovered that it existed via the Twitter of no less than U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin. Medyo, we didn't get straight answers with regard to Task Force Ayungin, how long it's been here. Do you think this could have been a reaction? Okay, the other angle. Some are saying that they're taking advantage of, dito sa kind of like a fight or the tensions between our
The
president and our
instability
vice
inside the
president.
Philippines.
Right, yes.
Absolutely. So obviously, China doesn't do anything in isolation. Although we know historically there are times that yung kanilang mga troops or kanilang mga personnel on the ground have a degree of strategic autonomy. Meaning sometimes it's not very clear whether what they're doing on the ground or in the seas is necessarily a reflection of what Zhong Nanghai or the top leadership in China wants. For instance, again, speaking of India, the last time President Xi Jinping was here visiting Prime Minister Modi, there was a major incident in the disputed areas. And to be honest, until now, hindi pa rin clear sa mga tao whether that was intentional, good cop, bad cop situation, or there were some more rogue elements pushing the envelope. So I don't know for sure if what's happening here is it has a clearance from the very top, or there is an exploitation of the room for maneuver that was given to them in terms of their operational, autonomy as far as some of the troops on the ground is concerned. Now, having said that, yes, absolutely, in theory, it is very possible that China is trying to remind the Philippines to go slowly and to be careful, especially with bringing in the Americans, because they want to remind us that before you want to talk about the Americans, you have to deal with me, and I have this preponderance of force, right? And also perhaps signaling to the Americans to also be very careful that you have to tiptoe around this. You don't go too strong on this, right? We also saw that in Ukraine, no? The moment that Biden, for instance, cleared the Ukrainians to use American missiles against targets deep within Russia, immediately Putin also came in and said, oh, you want to go down that road? Maybe you want to go tactical nuclear weapons, right? So I won't be surprised that could be angered. But you're absolutely right. Whether it is true that in this case, there's also a look at what's happening inside the Philippines or not, ang realidad po dito is, pag mahina tayo domestically, kung magulo yung politika natin, if you have a situation whereby it's normalized for a vice president to openly, threaten assassination of the president and get away with it, if we look vulnerable, if our leadership looks indecisive, absolutely, I think there's every reason for our rivals, and in this case for China, to push the envelope.
Okay, but Richard, the DFA did file another diplomatic protest against China, which brings a total count to 60 against Beijing and 193 under the Marcos administration. I mean, at this point, how important are diplomatic protests?
Well, you have to register that you're not happy with the situation. I mean, just to put things into context, during Duterte, at least earlier years of the Duterte administration, you had a president who didn't want even for us to forget about protesting. He didn't even want us to publicize what China was doing. So at least we're making it clear that we're unhappy with the situation. More importantly, of course, we also had our allies and friends. A while ago on Twitter, I saw all the major ambassadors, Britain, our key allies, all of them also issuing statements. The U.S. State Department also issuing statements. I was talking to our Indian counterparts, Japanese counterparts also here in New Delhi about where they stand on this issue. So we have to make sure we do not normalize this. I don't know about the president inside if he's okay with assassination plot threats against him. But as far as the West Philippines is concerned, we should not normalize this. We have to make it clear to China that there will be a diplomatic cost. And if they keep on pushing it, eventually we will be forced to also engage in more creative responses. I think it's for the same reason. For instance, we had the Russian submarine surfacing, and the next thing you know, the president made a big statement about it. In theory, actually, there was nothing wrong with what the Russians were doing, because that's within our exclusive economic zone, not territorial sea. They have the complete right for them. It's freedom of navigation. And apparently it was due to weather conditions. But by President Marcos Jr. coming out and saying that's very worrisome, or for some of our officials to say parang medyo weird yan, that's our way of not normalizing Russian submarines passing through our waters. Russia is not our territorial rival, but Russia is a key ally of China. Russia just conducted exercises with China a few months ago. Russia could be engaging in intelligence gathering against us in favor of China, as China helps them also on the Ukrainian front. So this is about not tolerate. This is about a kind of a zero tolerance policy, or not normalizing bullying and intimidation tactics. But going back again to your first questions, you cannot just call it out. You have to back it up by some operational reconfiguration. So if we're going to do counter deployment by sending naval warships, then so be it. But make sure meron tayong coordination with our allies. Having said that, mukhang may joint patrol na naman tayo with our, I think, Japanese and American naval allies recently. But then again, doing patrols alone obviously is also not working. There has to be something that comes with it. Maybe our allies and friends could also communicate, not file diplomatic démarche but behind the scenes also communicate that they cannot ignore what China is doing to the Philippines, and inevitably they will have to help the Philippines, whether it's Task Force Ayungin, whether it's giving us more radar system and missile systems. Ako naman, if I were the Philippine government, I will use all of these incidents to go to the next administration in the US and say, we need the best weapons you can give us. We need everything you can give us in addition to you standing by us if ever things get out of control. So we can leverage this crisis into opportunity by pushing our allies to be much more forthcoming and generous with us when it comes to defense cooperation and also defense aid. Because some of the top officials in the incoming Trump administration are openly saying Philippines is frontline state, and frontline states will have to get whatever assistance they need, especially in terms of their naval capabilities.
Well, Richard, it is December, and I remember during this time last year, I was with the first civilian convoy to the West Philippine Sea, and at the same time, an incident over at Baho de Masinloc happened. It was also a ramming, it was also a water cannoning. The same thing happened December of this year, I believe. I mean, looking back, alam ko medyo maaga-aga pa, pero 1 year later, what do you think are the gains of our fight over in the West Philippine Sea? Have we moved? Have we progressed? Have we become better? Have we defended our territory, our EEZ well? What would you say would be your assessment of where we are at?
Well, first of all, it's very important, right? Una-una, pinakita natin sa mundo na yung position natin sa West Philippine Sea ay hindi one-off lang. Pinakita natin na yung position natin sa West Philippine Sea ay reflection of a consensus among our strategic elite. Because to be honest, yung isang kritisismo sa Pilipinas is pabago-bago yung sinasabi natin or paiba-iba yung sinasabi natin. So, first of all, Gretchen, what we have showed is that we consistently are willing to hold the line. That is important. Second, I think we have been very successful in mobilizing public opinion. You're free to do Kalye survey. You're free to do scientific survey. It's absolutely clear that the vast majority of the Filipinos have very negative opinion of PRC, the leadership, the communist leadership in China, and continue to have a lot of faith and continue to advocate for a lot of cooperation with our key allies. Those are major gains, Gretchen. I don't think that we have to underestimate them, considering what I remember from the Duterte days, when a lot of our kababayans, because they were supporters of President Duterte, they seemed to be amenable to the kind of a pro-China disinformation that was coming out of certain quarters, or seemed to be open to some sort of, let's just say, soft peddling on the situation. Thank God we're out of that messy situation. And if you look at pro-China disinformation or elements close to the previous administration or making pro-China lines, they're very, very isolated. That, for me, is a huge, huge success. The floor, a floor of what is acceptable when it comes to our national interest and self-respect. To be honest, Gretchen, we didn't have that. Second, as you said, of course, the civil society is getting more involved. There's more public awareness. There's more conversation with the government. There's more exchange of ideas, including from people like me who are not part of the government, but feel comfortable enough at medyo confident naman tayo magbigay ng mga opinion all the time. So I think that openness and that coordination is very helpful. But thirdly and lastly, I think we're also consolidating our security partnerships. We signed a reciprocal access agreement with Japan. We already finalized a new trilateral security partnership with Japan and the United States. We're looking at building a relationship with the country I'm in right now, India, the French, the Spanish, the British. All of them are looking at expanding their security cooperation with us. So we have come a long, long way from where we were 2 or 3 years ago. But Gretchen, is that enough? Obviously not. That's why you have to level up. We have to look at new options, and we have to look at how we can leverage our relationship with our allies as they also go through their political transition, most dramatically in the case of Donald Trump.
Okay, Richard, let's just pull it back a bit, no? Recently, with the movements at kung nasaan, no, yung exact presence ng multiple number of Chinese ships, whether CCG or militia, parang medyo iba yung movement eh. Early on in the year, the first half, it was all about Ayungin, right? I think June 17, that incident ended Ayungin. It's been quiet there so far. Then it moved to Escoda. Then we've been hearing Rosal Reef. Now Scarborough Shoal again. Sometimes sa Pacific Ocean pa, di ba? Is that leveling up too? And how do we even respond? We're just midway through our AFP modernizations. There's issues about natapyasan yung budget, although
Binalik
you're
na.
right.
Binalik
Binalik
na
na at
sa Senado.
nagkaroon pa tayo ng pirmahan with Japan just this week about 600 plus million. But you know, it's going to take a while to like onboard all the modernization, all the equipment to train our people, our personnel. So paano to? Anong gagawin natin?
Dapat palitan niyo ata yung pangalan ng show niya. Hindi na big story, deep dive na yan. Nakapin niyo na yung title ng pod. This is very detailed. I mean, thank you. Those are excellent questions. Parang nagising ako bigla. Hindi pumayos yung hair ko. So I just took a power nap because diretso ako sa work last night. Going back to this, kulang ng kape. Going back to this, I think you're absolutely right, Sean, in a sense that na-expose talaga yung mga limitasyon natin. Nakikita natin na we're nowhere close to the kind of capabilities we need. But Sean, let's not forget, we're dealing with the most powerful navy in the world. Just this morning, I was talking to some of the top naval officials here in India, and they openly are saying, I mean, India is the biggest country by population. They're saying China is just next level. I mean, it has a navy even larger than the United States, not to mention their militia forces. So it's an unfortunate reality that when you're facing the biggest naval force in the world, you're going to be punched here, and then if you defend here, you're going to be punched somewhere else. So we have to be ready. And as I mentioned in our discussions early on, this is an integrated theater. Hindi lang West Philippine Sea, hindi lang Panatag Shoal or Ayungin Shoal or Sabina Shoal. Eventually, the Taiwan question is going to be more and more relevant as the Philippines makes it much more public that it's open to more American weapon systems being positioned in northern Philippines vis-a-vis Taiwan. So dapat humanda tayo talaga na there'll be multiple points of tensions in the coming months and years when it comes to China. Kaya kailangan talaga natin mag-level up. But for me, tama lang in a sense na nakita natin yung mga kakulangan natin because it makes it much harder for our politicos, right? To ignore our national security needs. Maybe less piatos and more missile systems, more protection of our national security, right? Less focus on petty bickering at home and more focus on unifying the country behind a certain cause. So in that sense, I think nagkaroon din tayo ng revelation, moment of truth. And I think that moment of truth, if we deal it in a proper way, could be a foundation for more sustained development of our capacity in the coming years or so. Dahil sa nangyari sa atin namulat din yung ibang bansa eh. Like India, for instance, they didn't even make statements about the PCA ruling until very much later on. Now they're closely watching what's happening in the Philippines, right? Many countries around the world, including Europe for a long time, they were not paying attention. The South Koreans for a long time were quiet on this. Now all of them are talking about what's happening here. The Canadians want a reciprocal access agreement with us. So I think we have created enough awareness and also enough moment of self-reflection for us to move to the next level. Having said that, let me end on this note. This is very important. Huwag natin kalimutan yung kahalagaan ng diplomasya. Because to be honest, when I go across Southeast Asia, the number one criticism of us is this. Ang galing nyo mag-booking ng bullying sa inyo. Ang galing nyo mag-call out. Ang galing nyo kumuha ng tulong sa ibang bansa. Pero ipakita nyo rin na handa rin kayo makipag-diplomasya. When I say diplomacy, I'm not talking about submission, right? I'm not talking about acquiescence. When I talk about diplomacy, it's about what Indians are doing right now, which is you stand your ground, you create better conditions for engagement, and then from there, you negotiate some sort of a ceasefire. So we have to try to find the ceasefire, meaning yung ginawa natin sa Ayungin, sana expand natin to more and more features in the West Philippine Sea. But in order for us to get that, we have to first get China's respect.
Correct.
So that will take some time because we had 6 years of Duterte and we have had an under-modernized military for a long time. So unfortunately, we are paying the price for our past sins also and catch-up time.
Well, we do have to see the gains on the table as well as on the ground. In the meantime, thank you so much for joining us and giving us your time all the way from India. We look forward to hearing more of your insights from there. We have geopolitical analyst Richard Heydarian.
Now, up next, the Energy Regulatory Commission approves the collection of some 3 billion pesos in unsettled reserve market fees. How much will this affect current power rates? We'll be getting the details from ERC Chairperson Attorney Mona Lisa de Malanta when the big story returns. Keep it.
Welcome back. You're still watching the big story here on One News. Consumers need to get ready for this. A nationwide power rate hike is set to be implemented at the start of 2025. This after the Energy Regulatory Commission permitted the National Grid Corporation of the Philippines to recover the 3 billion peso payment for ancillary services. The looming rate hike will be implemented in tranches. At least 12 centavos per kilowatt hour will be added to the power bill within a period of 3 months in Luzon, 6 months in Visayas, and 3 months in Mindanao. Utility companies have been planning to implement the rate hike since February and March of this year, but ERC delayed the implementation. Let's discuss this and more with Attorney Mona Lisa de Malanta, Chairperson of the ERC. Magandang gabi po sa inyo.
Magandang gabi. Good evening, Gretchen, Sean, and Pauline. Good evening to everyone with us tonight.
Attorney, can you tell us what do ancillary services mean at bakit po kami may utang na ganito?
Okay. Utang natin ito. This is
To be fair.
this is the service that was provided to us during February and March by several power plants that were instrumental in making sure that the grid did not collapse during those periods. So every month, every day, actually, every minute of the day, there are plants that provide to the system to make sure that the frequency is maintained, that if somebody is a quick responder, a backup plant comes on stream so that everything will flow whenever we switch on our switches, light would turn on, and whenever we plug our chargers, our cell phones will get charged. So these are service providers. This is different from what is billed to us on a monthly basis that we see from the meters in our homes, for example. This is metered at a higher level, at the high voltage side. So that's why sometimes we're not very familiar that it's happening, but that it's being provided. But this kind of service is being provided to make sure that the electrons reach our houses and our offices.
So, bale, Attorney De Malanta, no? Just to simplify everything, parang ano lang yan eh. Pag nakatira ka sa building, may babayaran kang kusay, di ba? Parang, kasi sino bang in charge dyan? And we all have, apart from our dues, or nakakasamay part na parang kusa, di ba? Common use area. So, parang it's some sort of charge like that.
Some similarities. Yes, that's correct.
Right.
Yes.
So my next question is, of course, in your release, which we read, you talk about a reset process. Can you explain to us, no, at least for the benefit of consumers, what this reset process is?
The reset process is different. It's for the basic charge of our, for example, NGCP, our system operator, and our distribution utilities. Like if we're in the Meralco area, the Meralco basic charges to us. This is different because this is the charge that they can collect from the consumers for putting up those wires that you see now, those transformers that you see now on the screen, maintain the wires, making sure that they are all working properly. So this is for a different charges, different from the ancillary services that we were talking about earlier.
Okay, Attorney, well, looking at the timeline, no, Luzon and Mindanao will be charged for 3 months, while Visayas naman will have to pay itong ancillary services nga for 6 months. Can you explain why? And Attorney, after ba nung period na po yun, balik na po sa normal ang charges ng kuryente?
I wish I could say balik na tayo sa normal, but just to explain the difference in the period, sa Luzon and Mindanao po, 3 buwan lang yung itong deferred payment. Kasi in Luzon, sabi natin, 12 centavos per kilowatt hour over 3 months. Kasi pag winan-time payment natin ito, 36 centavos dapat ito per kilowatt hour. In Mindanao, 3 centavos per kilowatt hour over the next 6 months. Kasi 9 centavos per kilowatt hour lang if we were to do a one-time payment. But in Visayas, dahil mas malaki yung reserba, yung ancillary charges na nagamit nila during February and March, 72 centavos per kilowatt hour yung dapat one-time payment. So medyo mabigat yon for an ordinary consumer. So ang ginawa namin, hinabaan namin yung period para maging pantay na lang sila ng Luzon, 12 centavos per kilowatt hour, but they will have to pay for it over a spread of 6 months. Ideally, 3 months lang sana yung hinahabol namin. January, February, March, para pagkatapos nun, alam naman natin kung ano yung nangyayari pagpasok ng March, April, May, and June, mainit na naman, tumataas yung konsumo natin, tataas na naman yung bayarin natin sa kuryente kasi mas marami tayong ginagamit na kuryente. So, gusto sana namin wag umabot dun sa summer months. But for Visayas, medyo mabigat kasi sa bulsa pag ginawa nating 3 months lang yung payment terms.
But Attorney, is this related to the power crisis that we experienced over in the summer and also to the Panay grid, if I can recall?
Yes. Not really with the outage in the Panay grid. That happened around New Year, January of this year. So not really related to that, but definitely related to the high heat indices that we experienced during the summer months, because February and March, the condition was already leading up to the high heat indices. Hindi pa siya record-breaking during February and March, but nakita natin pataas na. And come April, May, and June, yun na pumasok yung record-breaking high heat indices, and that's why at a certain point in time, we had to suspend the operation of the market because the situation was really not normal. There were state of calamities declared in various parts of the country. So definitely it wasn't your competitive situation where markets are expected to operate.
Attorney, I mean, I'm not quite familiar with the history of this, but is this a constant every year that we have to prepare for paying for ancillary services? Because, you know, as a consumer, we do want some sense of control over our power bill. Pero ito parang unexpected charge eh. Ano ba yung dapat namin paghandaan? At extraordinary ba? Aasahan ba namin ito sa 2025 for one?
Okay. Ancillary charges are paid or charged to us and paid for on a regular basis. Hindi lang natin napapansin sa bill. Kasi normally hindi siya tumataas ng ganito. Kaya hindi natin napapansin na meron palang ancillary charges. Ancillary services are like our silent heroes actually of our system. They make sure that the system doesn't collapse. So as long as things are normal, we don't really pay attention to them, but they're actually there, and we pay for that service. But for this year, again, because of the leading up to the high heat indices, and the second factor was that this year we started operating already our what we call a reserve market. Dati kasi kinokontrata lang lahat ni NGCP yung ancillary services. But this year, starting I think February or January, when a reserve market started operating, pwede na si NGCP bumili din sa market, sa merkado, nung mga reserve services. And this is really why the commission, after the February-March incident, suspended for a while the operation of the reserve market, because we had doubts on the pricing methodology that was being applied by the market operator. This is getting technical now, but that's why we had to suspend it. So on the question of whether we will expect this as a regular thing, hopefully not, because we've seen after the high heat indices come August, when we lifted or I think July when we lifted the suspension, things have normalized. The operation of the market has normalized. So hopefully by next year, we won't see anything like this. But we do need to prepare still for the summer months. That is a recurring thing. That is the reality of our situation in this part of the world during the summer months. In other parts of the world, they have to prepare for it during the winter months.
Right.
So may kanya-kanya tayong paghahanda na kailangan gawin.
Right, Attorney. So basically, long story short, what you're saying is these extra charges should help buffer for the hot summer months na parang hindi magyayari yung nakita nating tuloy-tuloy na mga red and yellow alert non-stop every day sa kasagsagan ng init. Pero last question na lang, very quickly, I think yung average natin is 200 kilowatt consumption ng isang bahay. Yun yung lagi nating peg, no? So kung ganun ang
200
konsumo...
kilowatt hour.
Yes, 200 kilowatt hours to be exact. So kung ganun yung average bill, magkano po yung ma-expect natin na bump up?
Okay, for Luzon, for a 200 kilowatt hour consumer, 24 pesos per kilowatt hour yung dadagdag doon sa bill nila. For Visayas, ganun din, pero for 6 months. For Luzon, 24 pesos per 24 pesos per month for 3 months. For Visayas, 6 months yon. In Mindanao, it's just 3 centavos. So 3 times 200, 6 pesos per kilowatt hour, 6 pesos per month in the bill for 3 months. So ganun yung aasahan natin on the average.
Okay. All right, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Attorney Mona Lisa de Malanta, chairperson of the ERC.
Another quick break for now, but right after that, President Bongbong Marcos signs 2 new laws that aim to help Filipinos in times of calamities. The details when we return. Keep it here.
Welcome back. You're still watching The Big Story here on One News.
President Bongbong Marcos has signed 2 new disaster-related laws that will help stricken Filipinos cope with calamities. Republic Act 12076, or the Ligtas Pinoy Centers Act, seeks to establish fully equipped evacuation centers nationwide to provide accommodations to residents affected by disasters and other emergencies. These centers will be built to withstand typhoon winds of up to 300 kilometers per hour and seismic activity of up to magnitude 8.0.
Schools are supposed to be sanctuaries for learning, creativity, and growth. They should not also bear the burden of being makeshift shelters. And we have our evacuation centers are rated to survive very 130 kilometers per hour winds, whereas we have seen in the past few weeks that these are way below the strength of the storms that we have been experiencing.
The other measure, Republic Act 12077, or the Student Loan Payment Moratorium During Disasters and Emergencies Act, mandates the suspension of student loan collections without penalty and interest during and after calamities.
The benevolence of this law allows the disaster-affected students and their families to have a breathing space as they recuperate and rebuild.
Okay, ang dami pang pwedeng pag-usapan.
Ang dami, of
Ang
course.
dami.
The electricity going up 2025, not the way we really want to welcome the new year, no? Pero kailangan
Pero ngayon
maghandaan
kasi
na rin.
mainit na eh.
Mainit na.
Pero talagang big story for tonight na hindi natin pinag-usapan. Talagang nagsalita na si Maris Racal at si Anthony Jennings.
Hindi natin pwede end tong show without touching on that. Kung hindi natin pwede tawagin sarili nating the big story.
No, because usually the real big story for the week comes on a Friday.
Always.
Yes.
Diba? Tapos Monday, may cliffhanger sa Monday.
Tapos pagdating ng Monday, may
iba
isa
pang
nang
magsalita
inuubo.
ng Monday.
Okay, wala na tayong oras. That's the show tonight. Pero ito, 19 days na lang. Pasko na. 19 days
Oh,
to go.
that's the other big
The
story.
other big story. Less than 20 days.
We are One News, all sides, all the time.
Thanks for tuning in. Have a good night and a great weekend. Stay tuned because coming up next is Play-by-Play with Andre Felix and Cheska Litton Calao. What's the story?
Maraming story. Alam ko sa inyo. Sobrang dami.
Ang dami.
Sa sports.
Gano'ng kainit?
Gano'ng
May
kainit.
hula ako eh.
Happy weekend na lang. Ate Gretch,
May tennis, hindi.
Tita Sean, and Boss Paui ha. I want
May
baby
tennis,
kisses.
Saka may boxing.
May box.
Di narinig.
May tennis.
Sabi ko, Boss Paui, I want baby kisses.
Boxing na lang tayo.
Boxing na lang tsaka tennis.
So, balik tayong sports, no?
Okay, nga pala, sports tayo. But thanks, girls, and have a great weekend. On the show tonight, we've got the latest scores in the NBA, the PBA, and of course, the Spikers Turf Semis, plus a preview of the upcoming UAAP men's and women's basketball finals.
And a huge honor for the country's greatest boxer of all time. Manny Pacquiao is heading to the International Boxing Hall of Fame.
Congratulations to the Pac-Man. I'm Andre Felix.
And I'm Cheska Litton Calao.
And here's tonight's play-by-play.